Hello children, this is after a long gap. Once again I am here with you all with one very important chapter of history, that is Nationalism in India of class 10. The chapter is too lengthy, so that's why I thought of explain this chapter to you with the help of this slide and with this video record in a small segment. If you see the length of the chapter, it's talk about the period 1915 to 1930. Now, what is the speciality of this chapter? To understand that, we need to understand the objectives of this chapter. The chapter focus that the how first decade of 20th century there was a growth of nationalistic idea or the feeling of nationalism. Another important aspect of this chapter is it explore how the Congress sought to develop the national movement. Another point, how the different social group participated in that movement and how nationalism captured the imagination of the people. With this different aspect of the chapter, we will try to understand this in the sequence wise or dividing it a small segment. So before going to start the chapter, let us try to understand what exactly nationalism means. Nationalism is a very wider concept where one is having a feeling of oneness among the people living in the country. And what kind of that oneness? As we know that India is a land of diversity with different cultural values, ethnic groups, customs, traditions, food habits, and different geographical locations and its demography. With these differences, when people come with one common identity or belongingness, that is called as what? The nationalism. Variations are the beauty of human life. People practices their own cultures, people practices their own traditions, but apart from that, keeping all their variations in one particular side of their life, and when they come all together with the feeling of brotherhood, that is what nationalism. Nationalism has its great significance in the history of contemporary world. Now, if we talk about the history, it influenced with the time, with the different reasons, and how the people they interpret its meaning. Let us take the history from a smaller unit. You are living in your society with certain community. Your community too has a history. So that history is called as what? The regional history. Another, if you go little wider, where large number of people living in the different part of the country with their own identities but the feeling of oneness, that is called national history. And such a setup at the whole level, at the world level, all around the world, so many things are happening. All these happenings, when we compile, that is called world history. Most important thing what we need to understand in this chapter is all these historical incidences at the regional level, national level, and the world level are having relation with each other. They equally impact the life of the people. So in the same way, the emergence of nationalism in our country is not only impact of our regional happenings or regional histories or the national histories, but there are so many things which has happened at the world level. So let us see how that feeling of nationalism arises among the Indians and that help us to free our nation from the colonial rule. Then to understand that, most important aspect is we need to understand the world level history. Let us take one very important year of the world history, that is 1914. As we all know that 1914 is the era of First World War. First World War broke out in 1914. It has so many impact all over the world, including our country. But here we are going to focus that how World War shaped the Indian history. Then we come to know that the breakout of First World War, though causes for destructions of various resources, loss of human life, there were lots of casualties, there were economic shutdown, there was pandemic situations or epidemic situations. But beside that, if we see the World War from the context of Indian point of view, it has causes for the emergence of this nationalistic idea at the very high sentiment. And what were the reason for this? We will try to understand this with the topic, how did the First World War help in the growth of nationalism in India? As we know that in 1914, India was under the colonial rule. It means the Britain was our colonial ruler. And Britain participated in the First World War. In that war, Britain not only faced lots of problem from the military aspect, but it has faces the economic crisis also. We know that in war, lots of resources are being used. It may be fooding items, it may be war expenses, it may be supplying arms and ammunitions to the soldiers who are fighting the war, providing them medicines and all. And to meet all this requirement, the most important thing any imperialist country need is what? The financial assistance. And to get this financial assistance, those imperialist countries like Britain, they started to introduce various ways by which they can earn money and make them economically sound. Same thing Britishers did in India. To meet their war expenditure, Britishers introduced income tax over our people. Beside that, they raised the custom duties which were input or which were imposed on those days. Another important aspect of the First World War was what? Whatever the essential goods which were highly needed for the people, their prices were increases. It almost reached double. Another, the force recruitment was made by the Britishers to strengthen their army. This is one aspect how the Britishers, they were just to meet their war expenditures and war requirement, various techniques, various methods they were adopting. But in another side, because of this, our people in those days, their conditions become very poor. Their conditions started to deteriorate. In meanwhile, when all this war was in progress, there was a failure of crops, which causes for the shortage of food materials, and due to which the influenza epidemic spread in many parts of India. Millions of people lost their life. These whole things that happened because of the war, and though India was not directly participated in the war, but they were paying heavily in the First World War, and that make people very furious against the colonial ruler. In whole this aspect, one important thing happened was what? The return of Gandhiji to India from South Africa. We know Gandhiji got a huge uh, popularity as he organized a movement in South Africa against the racial discrimination. Now, when Gandhiji back to India, his popularity gives lots of boost to the people of India. Then next was, with this continuous visit of Mahatma Gandhi in different part of the country, make some kind of tense situations for the colonial ruler in India, and to suppress the uprising of Gandhiji's satyagraha, they passed an act which is called as a Rowlett Act in the year 1919. So let us try to understand what exactly Rowlett Act is. The Rowlett Act gave the government the power to imprison any person without any trial for a period of 2 years. Now let me explain when we talk about that without any trial. When we talk about the detention of any person, any government is expected to follow a judicial trial. It means when the government wish to detain anybody, they have to go through various judicial procedures. For example, let us take a government want to detain somebody. The person must be informed about his detention and the cause of his detention. Another important aspect in this judicial trial, within the 24 hours of time, the person or his relative, his parents or his friends or his neighbors, whoever are closely associated with the person, they must be informed about the detention of this person. But Rowlett Act not fulfilled any kind of this judicial trial. Another important objectives of this Rowlett Act was, it aim of the act was to destroy the national movement by imprisoning the national workers. Now when we talk about the national workers, here all those people who were fighting for the freedom of the nation, it means who were willing that our country should not be ruled by any colonial rulers or any external powers. So with all these happenings, if you see, the Rowlett Act main objectives was to suppress the uprisings, so-called national movements. That's why, calculating all its objectives, the Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress, it declared a Rowlett Act as a black legislation. Why? Because it was against the basic human rights. Now, next, when all these things were happened from very beginning, we try to understand that what is nationalism, how nationalism started to take a shape in our country, and what were the initiatives were taken to make the people understand about the satyagraha. This aspect we have discussed. Now, this is the first segment of this chapter, and I'm going to conclude this first segment of the chapter with a small assignment for you. As what you have understand with this explanation, you try to solve out or you try to do this assignment so that further we can proceed. And if you have any kind of doubts, any kind of queries, you can ask me through different means, through WhatsApp, or you can just contact me in my personal numbers. Now your assignment work is: Gandhiji organized non-violent satyagraha against the Rowlett Act. You need to write a short note on this. Another is: a hartal was organized on 6th April 1919. Rallies were conducted and shops were closed down. Worker conducted strikes. Transport and communication system come to be a standstill. This is another uh, topic in which you need to think and you need to write. And finally, the protest lead to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And what is Jallianwala Bagh massacre? How it's impacted the later part of the history we will discuss in next video. Thank you.